I need to get this story out there because I still can't sleep properly, and maybe writing it down will help someone else avoid making the same mistake I did. This happened to me about 8 months ago, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. My therapist says talking about it helps, but honestly, I don't know if anything really helps when you've seen what I've seen. So let me start from the beginning. I was 23 years old and drowning in student loan debt like everyone else my age. I had been working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water, but it still wasn't enough. My day job was at a coffee shop downtown making lattes for people who didn't even look at me when they ordered. The pay was terrible, and my apartment was this tiny studio in the worst part of town where I could hear my neighbors fighting through the paper-thin walls every single night. That I was scrolling through job listings one Sunday afternoon in March when I came across something that seemed too good to be true. Night desk clerk at the Sleepy Pines Motel. $25 an hour. No experience necessary. I read it 3 times because that was more than double what I was making at the coffee shop. The listing was sparse on details, but it said the hours were 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and they needed someone immediately. I should have known right then that something was off. Nobody pays that much for a desk clerk position, especially at some rundown motel I had never even heard of. But I was desperate and stupid, and I thought maybe I had finally caught a break. I called the number in the listing, and this older woman answered. Her voice was raspy, like she had been smoking cigarettes for 40 years. She said her name was Marlene and she was the owner. Marlene asked me exactly 3 questions. Could I work nights? Was I comfortable being alone? And did I have reliable transportation? I said yes to all 3, and she told me to come in that Tuesday night for my first shift. No interview, no background check, no references. She just gave me the address and told me to be there by 10:30 so the current guy could show me the ropes before he left. The Sleepy Pines Motel was about 40 minutes outside of town on Route 9. It was one of those old highway motels from the 50s that you see in horror movies. Single story, 15 rooms in a horseshoe shape around a cracked parking lot. The neon sign out front was missing half its letters, so it just said SLEYPNSMOL. There was a dingy little office at the center with a flickering light above the door. The whole place looked abandoned except for 2 cars parked in front of rooms on opposite ends. I pulled into the lot at 10:20 and sat in my car for a minute just looking at the place. It was early March and still cold. There was this fog rolling across the parking lot, and everything had this gray, depressing look to it. I remember thinking I should just drive away, but then I thought about my rent that was due in a week, and I got out of the car. The office was even worse inside than it looked from outside. There was a musty smell like old carpet and cigarettes. The desk was this ancient wooden thing with a computer from like 1995 sitting on it. There were keys hanging on a pegboard behind the desk and a small TV in the corner playing static. A guy who looked about 50 was sitting in a rolling chair behind the desk. He had greasy gray hair and wore a stained flannel shirt. He looked up when I walked in, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong with his eyes. They were too wide, too alert, like he hadn't blinked in hours. His name was Dennis, and he did not want to be there. He stood up the second I introduced myself and started talking really fast. He showed me the logbook where I was supposed to write down any checkouts or disturbances. He showed me the key system, which was just old brass keys with room numbers on plastic tags. He showed me the cash box where I was supposed to keep money from anyone who paid in cash. The whole time he kept glancing at the clock on the wall like he was counting down the seconds. I asked him what I should do if someone needed something in the middle of the night, and he just laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. He said nobody here needs anything. He said the people who stay here want to be left alone, and I should do the same. Then he told me the rules, and this is where things started to feel really wrong. Rule 1. Do not leave the office between midnight and 5 a.m. for any reason. Rule 2. Do not answer the phone after midnight unless it rings exactly 3 times, then stops, then rings again. Rule 3. If someone knocks on the office door after midnight, do not open it until you count to 10 and make sure they knock again. Rule 4. If you hear sounds coming from room 7, do not investigate and do not call the police. Rule 5. Never go into room 12 even if someone calls from that room asking for help. I stood there staring at him thinking this had to be some kind of joke. Some weird hazing thing they did to new employees. But Dennis wasn't smiling. He grabbed his jacket and his keys and headed for the door. I asked him what the rules meant and he stopped with his hand on the doorknob. He turned around and looked at me with those wide freaked out eyes and he said, "Just follow the rules and you'll be fine." Then he was gone. I was alone in that office and I swear to God the temperature dropped 10 degrees the second Dennis left. I sat down in the rolling chair and looked around. The clock on the wall said 10:45. I had 8 hours and 15 minutes until my shift ended. The TV in the corner was still playing static and I got up to turn it off, but the second I touched the power button it changed to a local news channel on its own. I pulled my hand back and just stood there watching it. Some reporter was talking about road construction on the interstate. Normal stuff. I told myself I was being paranoid. The first hour was quiet. I played on my phone. I walked around the office looking at the faded tourist brochures from the 80s. I counted the keys on the pegboard. 15 rooms, but only 14 keys. The spot for room 12 was empty. I thought about what Dennis had said about never going into room 12 and I felt this cold weight settle in my stomach. At midnight exactly the phone rang. I jumped so hard I almost fell out of the chair. It rang once. Twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. I held my breath. 10 seconds passed. Then it started ringing again. My hand was shaking when I picked it up. A woman's voice said, "I need clean towels in room 4. She sounded normal. Tired but normal. I told her I would bring some right away and she hung up. I looked at the clock. It was 12:02. I wasn't supposed to leave the office between midnight and 5 a.m. But this was a guest with a reasonable request and it was literally my job. I grabbed 2 towels from the supply closet and headed outside. The fog was thicker now. The parking lot lights were dim and yellow and they barely cut through the gray mist. I could see room 4 on the left side of the horseshoe. I walked quickly because it was cold and I didn't like being outside. The whole place felt like it was watching me. I got to room 4 and knocked. The woman who answered was maybe 40 with dark circles under her eyes. She took the towels and thanked me and closed the door. Normal interaction. I started to relax a little. I was halfway back to the office when I heard it. A sound coming from somewhere on the right side of the horseshoe. It sounded like scratching, like fingernails on wood. Slow and deliberate. I stopped walking and listened. The scratching continued for a few seconds, then stopped. Then I heard a low moan, long and hollow and wrong. It made every hair on my body stand up. I looked at the room numbers on the right side. Room 7 was the third door from the end. The scratching and moaning were definitely coming from that direction. Rule 4. If you hear sounds coming from room 7, do not investigate and do not call the police. I speed walked back to the office and locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I sat at the desk and tried to calm down. It was probably just someone having a nightmare or watching a movie too loud. That's what I told myself. But the sound hadn't been like a movie. It had been too raw, too real. I looked at the logbook to see who was in room 7, but there was nothing written down. According to the log, room 7 was empty. The next few hours were torture. I kept hearing things. Footsteps on the gravel outside. The sound of a car door closing even though no cars left. Whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At 2 a.m., the TV turned itself off. At 2:30, the lights in the office flickered for a full minute. I was gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles were white. At 3:15, someone knocked on the office door. 5 slow knocks. I looked up, and through the foggy glass I could see a silhouette. A person standing completely still. My whole body went cold. Rule 3. If someone knocks on the office door after midnight, do not open it until you count to 10 and make sure they knock again. I counted. 1, 2, 3. The silhouette didn't move. 4, 5, 6. I couldn't see any features. Just a dark shape. 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence. The silhouette was still there, but they didn't knock again. I sat frozen in the chair staring at that dark shape through the glass. After what felt like an eternity, the silhouette turned and walked away. I heard footsteps on the gravel getting quieter and quieter. Then nothing. I didn't move for 20 minutes. I just sat there shaking, telling myself over and over that I just needed to make it until 7 a.m. But the worst part was still coming. At 4:30, the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. It stopped. I waited. It didn't ring again. That wasn't the pattern. I wasn't supposed to answer unless it rang 3 times, stopped, then rang again. This was 3 times and then nothing. I stared at the phone like it was a bomb. Then it rang again, but this time it didn't stop. It just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it. After 30 rings, I couldn't take it anymore, and I picked up. Heavy breathing. That was all I heard. Slow, raspy breathing like someone who had been running or crying or both. I said hello, but there was no response. Just breathing. Then a voice. A man's voice. Low and crackling like it was coming through a broken speaker. He said, "She's in room 12. She needs help. Please help her." My blood went ice cold. Rule 5. Never go into room 12 even if someone calls from that room asking for help. I slammed the phone down and backed away from the desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control them. The office felt smaller. The walls felt closer. I looked at the clock. It was 4:37. I had 2 hours and 23 minutes left. I decided I couldn't just sit there. I needed to do something to keep my mind from breaking. I grabbed the flashlight from under the desk and walked to the window. I shined it out toward the rooms. Most were dark. Room 4 had a light on. Room 7 was dark. And room 12. God. Room 12. The door to room 12 was open. Not all the way, but enough that I could see darkness inside. I hadn't noticed it before because of the fog, but now I could see it clearly. The door was open and swaying slightly like someone had just walked through it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. I stood there staring at that open door, and then I saw movement. Someone was standing in the doorway of room 12. A woman. Even from across the parking lot, I could tell something was wrong with the way she stood. Too stiff. Too still. She was wearing what looked like a white nightgown, and her hair was long and dark and hanging in front of her face. She didn't move. She just stood there in the doorway facing the office. Facing me. I dropped the flashlight. The beam hit the floor and rolled, pointing at the door. I ducked down behind the desk and tried not to make a sound. My heart was beating so loud I thought it would give me away. I stayed down there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. When I finally got the courage to look again, the woman was gone. The door to room 12 was closed. The last 2 hours of my shift were a blur. I sat at the desk with my back to the window because I couldn't bring myself to look outside again. The TV turned back on by itself. The phone rang twice more, but I didn't answer. I heard the scratching from room 7 at least 3 more times. At one point I heard what sounded like a child crying, but when I checked the logbook there were no children registered. When 7 a.m. finally came, I practically ran out of that office. Dennis showed up at 7:05 looking just as exhausted as I felt. He asked me how my first night went and I just stared at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him everything. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me. Like he knew exactly what I had experienced and was waiting to see if I would break. I told him it was fine. He nodded slowly and said good. Then he told me Marlene wanted me back tonight and every night this week. I should have quit right there. I should have walked away and never looked back. But that $25 an hour was so much money. More money than I had ever made. And I kept thinking maybe the first night was just a fluke. Maybe I had been tired and paranoid and my mind had played tricks on me that I came back that night. And the night after. And the night after that. Each shift was worse than the last. The sounds got louder. The phone calls got more frequent. The woman in room 12 appeared every single night standing in the doorway or sometimes pressed against the office window with her hair covering her face. On my 5th night, I finally broke the rules. It was around 3 a.m. and I heard screaming coming from room 7. Not moaning or scratching, but full-on screaming like someone was being hurt. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the master key and ran outside. Room 7's door was locked. I fumbled with the key and got it open and burst inside. The room was freezing. My breath came out in clouds. The furniture was covered in dust like nobody had been in there for years. And on the wall above the bed, written in something dark that I didn't want to identify, were words. "She's still in 12. Help her, help her, help her." Written over and over, covering the entire wall. I backed out of the room and ran back to the office. I locked the door and grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, Marlene called me. I don't know how she knew what I had just done, but she knew. She told me very calmly that I had broken the rules. She told me I needed to leave immediately and never come back. She said some people can't handle the night shift and I was one of them. Then she hung up. I didn't argue. I grabbed my things and got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I never went back for my last paycheck. I never spoke to Marlene or Dennis again. I tried to forget about the Sleepy Pines Motel, but I can't. Because 2 weeks after I quit, I was watching the local news and there was a story about the motel. Police had finally investigated after neighbors reported strange sounds. They found evidence of multiple deaths in room 12 going back decades. Women who had disappeared. Women who had been staying at the motel alone. The case is still open. I don't know what was happening at that motel. I don't know if it was ghosts or something worse. All I know is that I took a night job that paid too much and I found out why. Some places are wrong. Some places are soaked in darkness and pain and they attract more of it. And the Sleepy Pines Motel was one of those places. I still have nightmares about the woman in room 12. I still hear the scratching from room 7 when I'm trying to fall asleep. And sometimes when my phone rings at night, I count the rings, holding my breath, hoping it doesn't follow the pattern. 3 rings. Silence. Then ringing again. If you ever need money bad enough that you're looking at job listings that seem too good to be true, I'm begging you to trust your instincts. If something pays way more than it should, there's always a reason. And usually that reason is something you don't want to know about. I learned that lesson the hard way, and now I'm stuck with memories that wake me up at night drenched in sweat. The Sleepy Pines Motel is closed now, condemned by the county. But sometimes late at night, I still think about driving out there. I think about going to room 12 and opening that door and finally finding out what was really happening, what those rules were really protecting me from. But then I remember the woman standing in the doorway with her hair covering her face and her white nightgown glowing in the dark, and I know I'll never go back. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some questions are meant to stay unanswered. And some jobs, no matter how much they pay, are never worth the cost.